The Forgotten Ones. Chapter 3. The Watcher in the Dark. Ellis didn't go home that night. He couldn't. The city streets, slick with rain and cloaked in shadow, seemed too dangerous, too alive with the things that lurked just beyond the edges of his vision. Every passing figure felt like a threat. Every reflection in the wet pavement a reminder of what he had seen in Peter's apartment. He found himself in a small, dimly lit diner on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where the neon lights flickered, and the coffee tasted like burnt water. But it was warm, and it was empty. Safe, at least for now. Ellis sat in a booth near the window, staring out into the night. The rain tapped steadily against the glass, but in the silence of the diner, it sounded like fingers drumming against his skull. His hands were wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, though he hadn't taken a sip. He was too deep in thought, his mind circling the same questions over and over. What had Peter found, and what had Ellis stumbled into? He pulled out Peter's notes from his jacket, spreading them out on the table. The paper was wrinkled and smudged from the rain, but the frantic writing was still legible. Ellis sifted through them again, looking for something, anything that might make sense of what he had seen. His eyes scanned the pages, drawn to the same words again and again. The shadows are watching. They know when you see them. Don't let them in. His fingers hovered over one page in particular, a hastily drawn map of the city. Certain locations were marked in red circles. Peter's apartment, an old warehouse by the river, a crumbling church on the outskirts of town. Each of them was connected by jagged lines, as if Peter had been trying to trace a pattern, a network of places tied to whatever darkness he had uncovered. Ellis's eyes drifted to one unmarked spot, a building circled with a different color. Blue ink, barely visible beneath the chaos of red. He squinted at the handwritten note scribbled next to it. The Watcher. Ellis frowned, the name sending a shiver down his spine. The Watcher. He had no idea what it meant, but it felt important. The name, the way it was isolated from the rest, suggested that Peter had been looking for this. This person, or this thing. As Ellis stared at the word, a chill crept over him. A sudden coldness that had nothing to do with the rain. He glanced around the empty diner, the faint buzz of the neon sign outside the only sound. But there was something else, something just out of sight, a presence that felt too close, too real. He leaned back in his seat, scanning the room with slow, deliberate movements. There was no one there. No one but the waitress behind the counter, half asleep, and the old cook flipping stale pancakes in the back. But that feeling, that sensation of being watched, it was there, lingering just beyond the edge of the light. Ellis's gaze drifted to the window, and his heart skipped a beat. There, standing in the rain-soaked street, was a figure. Motionless. Unmoving. Its face was obscured by shadows, but Ellis didn't need to see it to know this was no ordinary passerby. The figure just stood there, its body blending into the darkness, like a silhouette carved out of the night. And though its face was hidden, Ellis could feel its eyes on him. Cold, unblinking eyes, fixed on him from across the street. Ellis froze, his breath catching in his throat. The rain slashed against the window, distorting the figure's outline, but it didn't matter. He could feel the weight of its gaze pressing down on him, like an invisible hand gripping his chest. He looked away for a split second, hoping, praying that when he looked back, the figure would be gone. But when his eyes returned to the window, it was still there. Closer. Alice's heart began to race. The figure hadn't moved. At least, not in the way a person should. It was still standing perfectly still, but somehow, it had shortened the distance between them. The shadows seemed to shift around it, drawing it nearer without any motion. His mind scrambled for answers. Was this the Watcher Peter had written about? Was it something worse? Ellis grabbed his mug and took a shaky sip of the bitter coffee, trying to compose himself, to ground himself in the moment. He needed to think. The figure outside wasn't coming closer anymore, but it wasn't going away either. It was waiting, watching. He looked down at Peter's notes again, hoping to find some clue, some explanation for what he was experiencing. His fingers traced over the words, flipping pages faster now, urgency clawing at him. But the more he read, the clearer it became. Peter had been consumed by this. The shadows, the Watcher, all of it had driven him into madness. Alice could see it now. In the way Peter's handwriting became more frantic, less coherent, as the pages went on. Once you see them, they follow. You can't hide. They'll always find you. Alice's pulse quickened. He glanced back at the window, half expecting the figure to be right outside the glass by now. But it wasn't. It hadn't moved. He swallowed hard and turned back to the notes. One phrase leaping out at him, circled in dark ink. They know your fear. That was when the door of the diner creaked open. Alice's head snapped up. His eyes darted to the entrance, but there was no one there. The door swayed gently on its hinges, rain pouring in from the storm outside. But no one had walked through it. The waitress was staring too, wide-eyed and frozen behind the counter. "Did you see?" Ellis started, but his voice trailed off. He didn't know how to finish the sentence. Did she see the figure? Or was he the only one being watched? Before he could ask again, the lights in the diner flickered. The buzzing of the neon sign outside cut out for a moment, plunging the place into near darkness. When the lights sputtered back to life, the figure was gone. Ellis shot to his feet, his heart pounding in his ears. He rushed to the window, pressing his hands against the glass, scanning the street. It was empty. Just the rain, just the night, but something inside him knew better. The figure hadn't left. It was just hiding. Behind him, the waitress spoke in a shaky whisper, her voice barely audible over the sound of the storm. Who was that man standing there? Alice's blood ran cold. She had seen it too. Alice wasn't alone anymore, and now the Watcher had found him. Thanks for sticking with The Forgotten Ones this far. If you're enjoying the suspense, make sure to like, subscribe, and share so others can join in. The next chapter will push the mystery to new heights. Stay tuned and prepare for more forgotten horrors. The stories may end, but the nightmares continue. Sleep soundly, if your mind lets you.